YouTube, Kinsey here at the Flocking Farm, and today we're going to be talking about my first time ever baking sourdough. Well, somebody decided that it was time to end her nap time, so she's going to be joining us for this portion of today's video. Sourdough. I really wanted to try baking sourdough bread for the first time, so I thought that would be kind of fun to film the whole process and share it with you. Before we really get going in today's video, would you be terribly opposed to hitting that subscribe button? We're kind of new to YouTube and we want to grow our YouTube family, so we would love to bring you along that journey. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. My first step was to measure out the flour that I was using, and this is actually one of the variables that I might be able to play around with to see what kind of dough consistency I can get. The original recipe actually called for 3 different types of flour, but all I had on hand was all-purpose and I was impatient and wanted to bake sourdough, so that could be something I could play with. I decided to measure out the flour and water separately and then stir them together, which was a great call because I'm kind of heavy-handed in that. And then this allowed just the water to sit with the flour and fully absorb before I started adding in the other ingredients. Now, I did decide to add Claudia, my sourdough starter, just directly to my mixture here because due to how messy the sourdough is, I didn't want to put it into another container to then just put it in the bowl, and then I wouldn't have all of it transfer over, and it was just going to be messy. So I decided to wing it, and I did the same thing with the salt. Then I dimpled it in here. This was quite the fun, messy process. I felt like a kid, like playing with Play-Doh or something, because it's all sorts of sticky and stuff. I was kind of worried initially that I was going to get too much on my hands, but that didn't seem to be a problem. I then took this dough and put it directly next to our wood-burning stove and started our stretch and fold process that you see me doing here. Now, the original recipe did say to do the stretch and fold 6 times. I only did it 5 times. By the 6th time, I kind of forgot about my dough and figured, oh, it's been like 2 hours. Let's just continue to let it rise. But for the first 3 stretch and folds, I did it every 15 minutes, and the last 2, I did it every 30 minutes. And then I let the dough rise for, I think, 3.5 to 4 hours before I touched it again. Another large variable here that I could play with is Idaho had just kind of given us a false spring, and it was pretty darn cold outside. We were back down into single digits. And even though we have the wood-burning stove in the house, the fire had died out overnight, and we were trying to get the house heated back up, so it was not the most optimal conditions for letting dough rise. Now, to get the dough prepared for its second rise, I realized very quickly that I did not have enough lighting and everything is being run off of extension cords. So, brought the work lamp over so that we could work the dough. Now, you'll see I kind of struggle to cut through this dough because once again, my famous word for today is sticky. The sourdough was pretty sticky. I wisened up fairly quickly though and realized, oh, hey, maybe I should sprinkle this with a little bit of flour so that it moves better on my surface, and that worked out really well. I was able to shape the dough much better. You can see these beautiful air pockets starting to form here. Now, the trickiest part was actually in the second rise on the counter before fully shaping it to put it in the fridge, was keeping my cats away from it. I swear, even though they're animals, their spirit animal is a raccoon, and they stinking love dough, so I kept a close eye on this. 30 minutes later, and I get to really start shaping and making this dough look beautiful. Flipped it over, stretched on all 4 sides and folded into the center, and then I flip it back over so that I can really shape it into a beautiful little ball. I'm starting to get pretty excited here because you can see those gorgeous big bubbles that have formed. Sprinkle a little linen inside a bowl and put this pretty side down. Then just repeat with the second loaf here. I then covered these in plastic and threw them in the fridge for about 16 hours to let them rise. It was at this point I also realized I had a professional gimbal for filming that I should have been using the entire time that I forgot I owned. So day 2's footage was much easier to shoot and I think worked a lot better. I threw down some parchment paper so I could get these ready to put in my tiny oven, and this was the point in which I was getting a little discouraged because I felt like my dough was a lot fluffier and bubblier and had risen more before it went into the fridge. So after I scored this, I scored it pretty deeply. I put it in my cast iron Dutch oven, which barely, I tested it that morning, barely fit into my itty bitty oven, which is the only thing I currently have to cook in. Now, I had preheated the Dutch oven for an hour prior to putting my dough in there, but my little tiny oven only goes up to 450 degrees, so I kind of had to play around with how to bake it since the original recipe calls for 500 degrees. Now I'm getting ready to pull it out so I can take the lid off to put it in for its second bake. And a word of caution, you will see me not think through this process here. May have accidentally burned myself with a tiny bit of steam.
So the steam is really hot. Just be aware of that.
Now I was looking at my first thing of dough, which was almost done baking, and I had scored it fairly deeply, so I did superficial scoring on this to see what the difference might look like, and you can see here how my first dough kind of turned out. Now it did end up a little bit toasty on top just because it's so close to the heating aspects. I'm really going to have to play around with temperature. The other thing with this is it was super hard to cut through. We had Bible study that night and I had to call in reinforcements for somebody else to start cutting this because the most of the dough was fine, but that bottom portion I could not get through the bread for the life of me. So reinforcements it was.
Okay, take 2. We're gonna try not to burn ourselves with steam.
I don't know how I'll do this in the future, but propping it open first seemed to work fairly well, so.
These are also hot.
And back in it goes for the second portion of the bake. Now, you'll see this didn't get quite as toasty as the other one, but I also didn't get that beautiful scoring like the other one did. However, this one was way bubblier than the first one was for whatever reason. Same dough, same method, but this one ended up being a nicer consistency bread overall. I cut most of it with a bread knife, then came in with a regular knife to finish cutting through that bottom portion, which worked okay.
Excellent sour flavor, and it's crunchy. That's a little dense. It's a little difficult to cut through.
Overall, as a first attempt, I was fairly happy with how the bread turned out, and apparently so was everyone else too, because I had no leftovers. I mean, I'd call that a win.
Thank you so much for joining us here at the Flocking Farm today. We're really enjoying sharing with you. Would it be too much to ask for you to leave a comment down below? I would love to know what you thought of today's video. If you have any tips or tricks or suggestions for baking sourdough, specifically in our kind of unique cooking situation, and or if you have any content suggestions, things that you would love to see from us and what we could share with you. You tell them. You tell them. Till next time, don't be afraid to live out loud, and we will catch you on that flippity flop.